Good morning, Teachers Talk Radio listeners. Just waiting on a call from our host, Tom Rogers, this morning. He should be with you any moment, live from Edinburgh. Live from Liverpool, this is The Morning Break with Tom Rogers on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We are live from the city of Edinburgh, and we are actually sat here live, which is an unbelievable feat in human kind of endeavour, and we have broken boundaries here. So we are live in Edinburgh, and I will introduce my guest very shortly. Thank you to Graham for producing us today, all the way in London.
Live from Liverpool, this is The Morning Break with Tom Rogers on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Good morning, everybody. I am joined live here by two prominent Scottish politicians, along with a fantastic geography teacher from Scotland, from Edinburgh, Scotland. And we are live, coming to you live from the heart of Edinburgh. What a wonderful city it's been. I've been here for this week on holiday, and I thought, what an opportunity to kind of join this with an amazing interview for Teachers Talk Radio to find out about what's happening in Scotland at the moment, because a lot of our broadcasts, just for the nature of who we have presenting, focus on England. But I thought today would be a wonderful opportunity to focus on Scotland. So I'm joined today with Michael Mara, who is an MSP and also the Education and Skills spokesperson for Scottish Labour. I'm also joined by Jamie Green, who is also an MSP, who represents the Conservatives and is the shadow cabinet, or was the shadow cabinet secretary for Education and Skills, but now has works in Justice, but that was only this week. Jamie, would that be right?
That's right.
That's right. And also Jackie, who is a geography teacher who teaches in Edinburgh.
Yep.
Brilliant. Good morning, everybody. It's a delight to be with you. And I've got a few questions to start off with. And the first one's really for Michael and Jamie. And you've obviously spent a lot of your political life working in education, or certainly a proportion of it. What inspired you to get involved in education? Is that something that is particularly interesting or a passion of yours, or is that something that you've just kind of fell into? Michael, do you want to start?
I suppose my interest in education, I'm the son of two teachers. I am also the father of a teacher. I'm just newly qualified. So education has always been a big thing in our family life, I suppose. And I think that the story sometimes I tell about is my grandmother was one of seven, and all six of her siblings worked in the mills day and night to save money to send her to college. And she became a teacher, and that completely transformed the course of our lives. So my family arrived in this country 200 years ago in total poverty, and actually that education changed the route for us in terms of our lives. My passion for that is what education can do for young people in Scotland and around the world. It can change lives. I don't think it changes enough lives these days, and actually we need to do more of that. But so I'm a great passionate supporter of our education staff right across Scotland. The amazing work they've done for many years, but during this pandemic as well. I was a very inept homeschooler for much of the lockdown, and I think for those of us who had that job to do, I think we've probably got an even greater respect for the work that teachers have done for our young people. But so there are huge challenges in our education system, but there is amazing work being done every day to support our young people and give them the best opportunities possible. But we can do much more.
Yeah, we'll come on to kind of the pandemic during the course of this interview, and we'll talk a little bit about the pandemic in Scotland when it's come to teaching and education, and obviously we'll bring Jackie in on that as well. Jamie, do you want to kind of answer that one too? So you represent the Conservatives, and why is it that you have been involved in education. Is there something for you that's kind of resonated with education?
So I think Michael's trumped me on all counts in that answer. It comes from
It was good, wasn't it?
I mean, that was a pitch perfect answer coming from
Why, thank you.
200-year-old family of teachers. So I wasn't a teacher. No one in my family, I believe, were teachers. And I was given the education brief because I was told to do it. So it's one of those things. Politics is a funny game. When you get into it, you end up heading in all sorts of directions. So I mean, for me, it was a real shift. Prior to that, I was the transport and infrastructure spokesman. So I was looking at trains, planes, and automobiles. But actually, my first gig when I was elected was I was our party spokesperson for digital economy and digital skills, which was my career background. And I guess that was quite an exciting opportunity because it allowed me to explore where Scotland was at with the digital skills gap, which was at the time, 5 years ago, massive. And I'm afraid to say, by the time the election came around just last month, this digital skills gap was just as wide as it ever was. So I'm afraid we didn't make a huge amount of progress on that. So when I took on the education brief, it was about a month before the first lockdown last February. And really, we as a party were having a bit of a shift in our policy positions on a number of things. And I guess I was a fresh set of eyes and ears on the brief. But of course, everything we'd planned really was turned upside down because of the pandemic. And then I guess we went into reactive mode. How on earth do we as a parliament hold the government to account over their plans over education? And what unfolded before all our very eyes was a 15-month period of, I would say, a fascinating insight into where education was up until that point. But again, all the rules were now off the table. So I had a great time on the Education Committee of the Scottish Parliament. I was a spokesperson and led on many of the issues that I'm sure we'll cover this morning. And it was a real baptism of fire in education for me. Very sad to have moved on to another portfolio, but in politics, people move around and you have to grasp these opportunities. And I'm sure I'll grasp this one. But I'm really pleased to be here today in a live environment with real people as well, not on Zoom, talking to people about education is something I'm still very passionate about. And that passion absolutely won't go away wherever it happens.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to come over here to Jackie. The same question, Jackie. Teaching. Why did you kind of get into that bracket?
I think I've got a passion for my subject, and for me, it's all about the geography. I really enjoy teaching it, and I think it's so important that we have people in front of our children who are passionate about the subjects that they're being taught. I also love being around young people. It's all about the relationships that you have in the classroom, and now our pupils are starting to think towards leaving, and it's incredibly sad. I said goodbye to one yesterday, and it makes you realize that you build those relationships over a number of years, and you get an awful lot back from it.
Absolutely. And by the way, Jackie, I'll try and refrain from any history-related jibes about you being a geography teacher and colouring in maps all day. I won't do that, I promise. And there'll be no other jibes happening today. But thank you ever so much for coming down. And of course, thank you to Jamie and Michael as well. We did, just to be clear, on Teachers Talk Radio, we do have a balance is at the absolute heart of everything we do. And we have invited the Lib Dems and SNP to be with us today as well, but they couldn't make it. So just to be absolutely clear, we have asked all political parties to be present, but we really do appreciate Michael and Jamie taking out the time from Labour and the Conservatives to be here. First question, and I suppose it would be good to start, and feel free to cut in, everybody, because we are live and we are, rest assured, socially distanced, but it does mean that we can kind of cut in and have a conversation rather than Zoom, you speak now, and I'll unmute you. I know you're not muted. I know, dear, and so on.
I can't hear you. What's that?
So the first thing is COVID. Now, what I'm interested to know is, and I want everybody's view on this, is this idea of catch up, which is kind of caught on in England and is certainly catching on in Scotland too. And obviously in England, they've more or less said that they're going to extend the school day. and there's going to be catch-up funding for tutoring and all these kind of other ideas going around. I suppose I'll start with Jamie and Michael. Number one, what's been happening in Scotland? And number two, what do the Conservatives and what is the Conservative and Labour position in Scotland on catch-up and catching up? Jamie, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've moved on from the education brief, but I was following with interest the national media yesterday over what's happening in England, and I was quite confused by the narrative behind it, because on the one hand, I think, first of all, we probably should remind listeners that education is a fully devolved matter, and that's not something you would ever get if you listen to Radio 2 or 4 on the BBC, because frankly, this was a front page news story and leading every radio interview I heard yesterday, but no one failed to mention that the policy that was announced yesterday was only applicable to England by a Conservative government in England. Education is run by an SNP government in Scotland. That's not a political point, that's a matter of fact. So what the UK Conservative Party policy is for English education is entirely up to them. I have no influence in it. We talk, of course. I would regularly, talk to my counterparts south of the border, but because education is so different in Scotland, it's not always applicable or relevant to copy paste those policies. We had been talking about the concept of catch up as Scottish Conservatives in Scotland as far back as a year ago, and the reason for that was it was clear then that every day, every week, every month out of the classroom was having an effect on attainment, on education, and on pupils' abilities to both sit exams, as we later discovered that were cancelled, and also to be properly engaged in the learning process that one would get in a classroom environment with a teacher who, as we've heard, is passionate about subject matter. And no disrespect to Michael, but I'm sure teaching geography is not one of his fortes. So the point, it was very clear that very early on that every single week that young people were out of school was a week of not lost learning, but a different type of learning. So because it was clear back then, and this was before prolonged periods of school closures, and we were one of the few parties to lobby for schools to be the first to reopen. That was a controversial position that we took, and even then, that was in conjunction with discussions with teaching unions and teachers themselves who had valid concerns about safety. But it was very clear that getting young people back into the classroom was going to be catch up. Therefore, would be necessary in whichever form, whether it was tutoring, whether it was more money directly to schools or head teachers, whether it was increased teacher presence or classroom distance, whether it was an enhanced online portal, whatever it wasn't there. It quite simply wasn't there. And we know for a fact that so many young people were simply not engaged in the online learning process because not every household was engaged in online learning or indeed had the technical ability to learn online. So, whatever the conversation is at the moment around what's happening in England, it's a very valid conversation. People are absolutely within their rights to have criticisms of the amount of money or the strategy, but at least they're doing something. And what we haven't seen in Scotland is that same level of ambition.
What, Michael, I'll come on to you in a second, but just before I do that, Jamie, what are because you obviously work as an MSP, you presumably know the ins and outs of what the kind of conversations and thoughts are when it comes to what is the plan. I mean, in England, we've had these ideas about the extended day, the tuition program. Are there any ideas knocking around I'll ask you both, are there any ideas, what are the ideas on the table in Scotland for catch up?
I don't think there's any magic bullet for any of this. I mean, I think all ideas should be seen as positive. So, whether that is changes to the school timetabling, to the holidays, I mean, one of the things, for example, was this discussion around cancelling school holidays, which was a quite controversial view at one point. I think forgetting the teachers themselves were working, and the teachers that I spoke to in focus groups specifically, both through the education committee, but also privately as party spokesman, it was very clear to them that they were absolutely exhausted as I was exhausted getting up at 7 in the morning and Zooming all day and night, and plus doing the enhanced role of the qualifications agency, which was missing a huge amount of the time last year. So I think people were banding around ideas because they were scrambling around for ways and means. What was clear though is that there were people out there who wanted to help, whether they were retired teachers, whether they were newly qualified teachers who were out of work, which is unbelievable when we have teacher shortage in Scotland, recently qualified teachers who had the insecurity of contracts, and just people from the wider world who were looking on because education had become so high up the agenda, were concerned about what was happening both to their own children, but young people in general, who wanted to chip in, who wanted to help in any way that they could. In fact, even in places like Glasgow, we saw charitable organisations helping with tutoring and catch up on a one-to-one level in deprived communities, for example, because they identified that it was those deprived communities who were suffering the most by being out of school. So, I think all ideas are welcome, and I don't think any one-size-fits-all approach will work across the whole country, whether it's across the UK or Scotland. Every council area is different, every school is different, and every household is different. So I think we need a broad range of things that will help young people catch up.
Michael, we'll come on to you. Obviously, the SNP have been in charge, if you like, of the pandemic when it comes to education. What's your kind of school report for them? I mean, where do you think, and I will come to you, Jamie, as well on this down the line, but where do you think they've gone right and wrong? And I say right, you might not think there's very much. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Scotland. That's why I'm here, to find out what's going on. But what's your school report? SNP education pandemic.
I mean, I don't think anybody doubts the scale of the challenge that faced the SNP administration and councillors and the education authorities and councils who employ the teachers in certain schools. It's an unprecedented disruption. And right across society, there has been no greater, since the advent of universal education, there's been no greater loss of school time than there has been in this last 15 months, 15 months now. It's a huge loss in time in school and the impact that that's going to have. So there is a broad question about what we do about that. I'll come back onto some of those issues. I think there has been, I'm afraid, complete absence of leadership at the very top, with the kind of the technical processes around this, about cancellation of exams, the timing of that, and essentially what we've had is our teachers and our education staff having to bail out the government. And we're finding directors of education finding out about huge policy U-turns about blended learning on the television at the same time as the public, with no time at all to prepare for those changes. Timetables being revised 1,000 times, literally 1,000 times. I mean, that kind of challenge for operating a school under physical distancing is extraordinary. Now, I mean, not everything was ever going to be right. Nobody would claim that it would be, but frankly, I think there has been a total absence of leadership at the top of that. So I'm a big critic of that top level leadership, and I'm thank God for our education staff who have kept the show on the road, frankly.
And one of the things, Michael, is Jamie, is that what we noticed last year is that when we criticised, and you will have spotted this from maybe watching outside in the Holyrood Chamber, is when we criticised the government, the feedback was always, how dare you criticise teachers? How dare you criticise our poor local councils? What about these young people? They don't need catch up. That's a terrible thing to say. Anytime you try to raise these issues, rather than accepting that things perhaps were not going so well, the response was always, well, that's not a valid criticism of how things are. You're simply undermining the state of Scottish education, and that therefore serves as a disincentive to those who work within the sector. And I don't think that's fair, because opposition parties have every right to hold the government to account.
I think it maybe talks to some of the what I'm worried about at the moment, which is I'm not sure the government is always grappling with the scale of the challenge. that's in front of them. Now, for right across from childcare, from early years, from primary, secondary, and the tertiary sector, there's huge disruption. Our institutions are massively challenged by what's in front of them. Their business models, if you're a university or a college or a nursery, are broken by the current circumstances. So there's a massive amount of work to be done. We haven't seen a comprehensive plan, and we haven't actually seen the proper expression of the scale of that challenge, how we actually turn this situation around. There's been lots of words about building back better, but actually we need something that's getting fleshed out in that. So I think the criticism Jamie touched on a little bit, the resignation of the Conservative government's advisor on catch up down south yesterday was about the scale of the amount of money in particular. I actually have a big problem with that catch up phrase. I think that first and foremost, I'm concerned about the mental health and well-being of young people and about our teaching and education staff. We need a summer. We need to actually support them to actually recover physically and mentally. And then we need to support them to actually see a proper education come back. So it's not about you've not done your homework. You have to catch up, and we're going to have to hothouse you to make this happen. We need tailored plans for individual students, informed and guided by teachers, and we need to put the resource in to get a small group down in personal support that can make that happen. And we need to have a reset guarantee so that people who are in the qualifications phase can actually have the opportunity to take qualifications again should they want it. We need a no detriment policy for entry to further and higher education for those who feel ill-served by the current situation. And we need to give our young people hope that actually they will not carry the weight of this pandemic through the rest of their lives. And that is, to me, giving our young people hope is that not just the job of politicians, it's what teachers do every single day, and they need to be supported in that work. And we, as politicians and policy makers, need to help them with that hope by giving them the opportunities to build a better life for themselves, for their family, their communities. And that's the basis that we're building a comeback plan, and we hope that the Scottish Government, the SNP, are going to back that.
Jackie, I'll come on to you now next. And you know, is there anything there that you agree or disagree with? I mean, we've heard there from Michael about the SNP leadership during the pandemic. What's your experience been, first of all, teaching in Scotland during the pandemic, but also is there anything there that you agree or disagree with in terms of Michael's summary of SNP leadership during the pandemic?
I think as a teacher, it's been incredibly hard work teaching from home. My technological capabilities have increased dramatically. So it's a very, very steep learning curve, but I'm incredibly pleased that I now have that know-how. And in some ways it was a positive experience, but it was incredibly hard work. It was incredibly worrying as well, both as a teacher and as a parent. And I think I'd really like to pick up on this idea of the catch up. And Michael, you talked about the negative connotations and the impact on mental health. And I see that as a parent, the narrative in the press of being catch up is very negative. Yeah. And my own children have said to me, "Are we behind, Mummy? Are we behind?" And I think that's really interesting. And then again, when I think about my own children, when I think about what they've missed out on the sporting activities, on the arts, they've missed out on the outdoor education. And I, as a parent, can provide that for my own children, but not every household can. Yeah. And for me, the priority should be that side of things, particularly over the summer. The last thing my own children need is to be sat learning in school or at home with me anymore. They need to be outside. Yeah. They need to be accessing arts and sports and outdoor education. And I think, personally, that would benefit every single child so much. And you'll see the knock-on benefits later on in terms of the academics, I think, because if you increase and improve their self-esteem through these kinds of activities and just the socialization as well, that's what they've missed. Being with their friends and interacting. So
I mean, the idea of catch up doesn't need to be an academic one. I think that's maybe, and I think we all take some responsibility for using language which, as you say, could be translated as purely about numbers and letters on bits of paper. And actually, for example, one of the issues that came out of the pandemic was the closure of outdoor sports centres and outdoor learning centres in Scotland, which faced a huge financial crisis. For obvious reasons, they weren't able to host overnight activities, and a lot of young people, again, from many deprived communities, who it's maybe their only experience of the great outdoors. So these things started to come up the agenda. Of course, sports gatherings couldn't take place, club activities, and of course, people being locked in their homes, young people simply not able to meet each other. So catch up can mean lots of different things. It doesn't necessarily need to involve academic catch up. It's the catch up of the school experience and everyone within that environment that you're catching up.
I also think we need to be really clear about I think Jamie's right in terms of the general impact, and Jack absolutely correct, I think, as well. I share that experience of as a parent. I would say that we have to make sure that we put inequality at the heart of this, though, because there are young people who have disproportionately suffered as a result of this. And those are the people from the most deprived backgrounds who would not have had the support at home, would not have had the technology at home, would not have had the environment at home that allowed them to actually to perform, to continue their learning. We already in Scotland had what's called here, and it's been a long-term debate around an attainment gap. Essentially, in the developed world, we have one of the biggest gaps between the most deprived and the better off pupils in the developed world in terms of attainment. Now, there's huge issues about poverty and social deprivation and as the root causes of that. But we need to do so much more. This situation has so much exacerbated that problem, and that will require resource, that will require support if those young people are going to recover their opportunities for the future. So we have to start off on what I think Jackie and Jamie are describing. We need outdoor education. We need to actually chill out and kind of get people's heads back in a decent place. Let's hope we don't have God forbid, another lockdown. But if we get through that process, we need to make sure that the resource is there to help those young people who need it the most. If we don't, we do genuinely risk a lost generation. So when we talk about a comeback, it's a long-term comeback for those young people from the most deprived background.
It's a long-term comeback, but the problem is many young people don't have the long time to wait.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm playing slightly devil's advocate and bringing it back to the academic argument, because the attainment gap exists pretty much in every Western education system in the world. Scotland is not an island in that respect. But of course, this is a current government who said that closing the attainment gap would be their defining mission. We know that it has not happened. This is a government which we're now in.
To be fair, though, would you argue that hasn't happened in any country? No country has managed to close that attainment gap.
Well,
many countries' gap isn't as big as ours.
It's not as big.
So it's fair to say that we have a particularly pronounced problem in Scotland. Sorry, Jim.
No, it is, and to illustrate that. So just looking at some statistics. I hate statistics, but they're important. And this is why it's important, because I want to make this connection between attainment and the academic catch-up argument, if you like, and why there is still an important element to it. And that is that if 30% of adults in our most deprived communities in Scotland have no qualifications at all. Now, that's an argument of historic education systems, arguably. But if that number carries on, if the current generation, this lost generation that may exist, the reason it's so important is that no qualifications makes it less likely that these people will be in working households, and workless households are more likely to suffer from many of the poverty-related issues that Michael mentioned, rightly so. So we've got some company.
This is the joys of life.
So making that link, qualifications are not the be-all and end-all, and I don't want anyone to misinterpret that, but they do get people into jobs. And the problem is that if you are in a deprived community, you are less likely to walk out of school with the same amount of qualifications at the same level as a neighbouring council next door to you, a few miles off the road. And the stark difference is massive. It can be 15 to 30% different depending on where you live. And that postcode lottery, which is the commonly overused political phrase, does unfortunately exist. Which means that in my area, the area that I represent, I have some very, very deprived communities, where there are some pockets where nobody in that community has ever gone to university. We've done analysis on that. A couple of miles up the road, the pass rate is through the roof, and people are going on to Oxbridge and all sorts of things. And I just feel that equity has disappeared from the Scottish system, and I wonder how on earth we get that back.
What's the kind of conservatives in Scotland solution to this? I mean, what is your keynote policy for reducing the gap between disadvantage in education?
I think the glib answer would be to focus solely on what happens inside the school estate, and the obvious answers to that are ensuring that there are enough teachers and classroom assistants in the school environment, that the school itself is of a sufficient quality. 1 in 11 school pupils in Scotland go to a school which is classed as either in poor or bad condition in terms of physicality, not the people, not the workforce, but the physicality. We know that because teachers tell us that, parents tell us that. That needs to be resolved. And those are logistical problems that you can fix. That then, having enough resource in the classroom reduces the Scottish teachers have one of the highest numbers of teaching hours in the world. Alongside countries like Mexico, I think, extremely poor ratios of teaching hours compared to other countries. But I do accept also that what happens outside of the classroom is a big factor in that. And we know that, again, I know that because I represent some of these communities, that where there are high instances of alcohol and drug abuse, where there are domestic violence issues in the household, where we have sectarian communities, as we do in the West Coast, that these are all influencing factors. And I do accept that there is a poverty-related gap. And that's why I genuinely believe that education is the route out of poverty, because it does get people to work. It's what drives many people in my part of the world out of fairly dim and dark prospects. And I grew up around that, so I've lived experience of that. So I think that's where the passion is to be refound, is that this can't be a simple argument about whether it's 2,000 teachers or 3,000 teachers. These are important, and I've got a policy on those. Everyone has a policy on that, but we have to look at this more holistically, I think.
Jackie, I'll come back to you, Michael, on that in a minute. But Jackie, in terms of the issues of being a teacher in Scotland, is there anything that you, I mean, what would be your key challenges, if you like, as a teacher in Scotland? Thinking things like workload, the curriculum. What are the things that really kind of make your job harder than it has to be?
That's a really loaded, difficult question to answer.
I ask lots of difficult questions. It's what I do.
From my own personal experience, a new school building makes a big difference. Certainly having a larger space, is something as simple as that for your classroom has had a huge positive impact on my day-to-day teaching experience. I would agree with that completely. In terms of, I'm very interested and spend a lot of time doing my own research. I've taken part in the teacher leadership program, so research time, a dedicated time for professional development has a huge positive impact. And I've seen that for me personally and seen the impact it's had for friends as well. So I think that going forward is a massive priority. And you get huge enjoyment from it as well. To do a wee bit of research, to go in and go out and find something out, and then you take that enjoyment, you take the results of that research back into the classroom, and if everybody's involved in that, then the collective benefit is huge and massive. Thanks.
That was a good answer. See, great answer.
It is a great answer, because I think it touches on the kind of the broader issue about resourcing and workload. How can we help people like Jackie to do that work, to find that inspiration for our teaching, for our pupils, to develop ourselves professionally, and to give that benefit to young people? That has to be at the core of what we do as policymakers. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we reduce workload. How do we do that? We make sure that we get more teachers into schools. We've seen a massive reduction in the number of teachers across Scotland over the last 14 years.
Why is that?
I mean, it's budget cuts, and we can have an argument about where those budget cuts come from, whether it's Tory austerity coming out of Westminster, whether it's the fact that austerity is multiplied by the Scottish Government to be passed on to councils. So actually, council budgets are cut at a far higher rate than actually the block grant that comes to Scotland is cut. So we've ended up in my city of Dundee. We have had since 2009 a 12% reduction in the number of teachers. So 1 in 9 teachers have gone, and the number of pupils has stayed the same. Now, you're not going to get good outcomes when you make those kind of decisions about resourcing, and so the chances for people to go out and then develop themselves as professionals is massively limited.
Where's that? I'll ask you both. Where's that money going then? If it's not going on the teachers, where's the money going?
So I would say that the Scottish Government have pretty clearly have other priorities. We've had council tax freeze twice in Scotland, which has cost billions of pounds for local authority budgets. We can talk about whether we like having our council tax frozen. Everybody likes not to have to pay more council tax, of course, but there are real repercussions for that. In terms of this kind of services that we need and rely on.
So, I mean, everything is connected. There's a knock-on effect on everything. If you're in a school building where the classrooms are physically small, as you say, that it makes a huge difference to have more space and access to more modern facilities and the IT infrastructure that you need to do your job more efficiently and more quickly. If you're in a class size of 35, which some teachers are, with multi-level teaching of 2, 3, 4 levels of pupils studying different, the same subject at very different levels, and you have up to a third of your classroom having been identified as having some form of additional support need. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There is a presumption to mainstream in Scotland. It's widely accepted that that's the right thing to do, but it only works if it's supported and if the teachers are supported. So, for example, one of the byproducts of some of the cuts that we've seen at a local level, and this is partly due to the complex way in which education is funded in Scotland, whether it's direct injection from the government into schools or head teachers, or whether it's via the local authority route, as the lion's share of it is, that when those cuts are made, we do lose classroom assistants, we do lose people with specialised training to deal with support, students with support needs. And all that does is bundle more pressure onto teachers. And we know that the effect it's having both on their mental health, but also their willingness to recommend teaching as a profession. And the numbers speak for themselves. When the EIS survey teachers in Scotland, the numbers are very stark and always serve as a warning to government. The problem is that those numbers got worse over the years, and the government hasn't heeded those warnings. So I think if you get the basics right, if you can reduce classroom sizes, if you can support teachers with more in-class resource, then that has an immediate knock-on effect on their ability to spend one-to-one. I hope it would have an immediate knock-on effect on the ability to spend one-to-one time with pupils who both need a bit more help, but also those pupils who are performing well and excelling in their subjects and maybe need that extra push as well. And some teachers that I spoke to spoke of great times of guilt when they knew there were people in their classroom they wanted to spend more time with, who were those who would excel and exceed if they were given that extra one-to-one push, but there simply aren't enough hours in the day, and that in itself is a problem which must be addressed.
Jackie, I'll come back to you. I mean, in Scotland, I know in England there's a huge issue with teachers feeling as though they're being listened to, I guess, by the political class, and I would certainly add myself into that bracket. Do you feel? I mean, you don't have to speak for yourself personally, but do you feel that teachers in Scotland are listened to by the political class? And you are live here with Jamie and Michael, so I've put you in a fantastic position here. It's brilliant.
Right now, I feel very listened to. Right now,
Yeah.
Is it really bad that that's maybe something I don't think about a huge amount, and I go in and I teach and I focus on those people in front of me and maybe don't think about that?
Here's a question from the politician to the teacher then. What would make life easier for teachers? You tell us.
Yeah.
The support assistant, having fantastic support assistants does, because the policy of inclusion is fantastic. But as you say, when there's the correct support in place, it works, and it can work beautifully. And if you've got good support assistants with you, it makes life 100 times easier and it gives just more opportunity to every single person in that class or every single young person in that classroom. Certainly, that makes a big difference.
And what sorry, Mike, what sort of levels of qualifications do you have an expectation for these people? Because there's a debate about, you know, what you need to be able to come into a classroom as assistant teacher, and what do you feel would be an appropriate level of formal qualifications in that respect?
I understand the argument that some people feel that support assistants should be very highly qualified, but I would also say that the most important quality is to be able to have a relationship with the young person that they're working with, and just a basic understanding of the curriculum. And I think the most important thing would be the ability to explain something and to help that child access. So yeah, I'm unsure about levels of qualification. I don't really see the need for much formal qualification. It's more the personal qualities.
Do you, Jamie? Do you think that TAs should be qualified to a certain level?
So I'm losing my voice.
That's all right. It's emotional.
I know.
It's face to face. It's COVID, post COVID.
I can't just switch the camera off. And, so, you know, look, I've heard both sides of this argument. For the first thing is we need to find people who are excited and interested in education as a career. And there may be people who are out there listening who want to get involved, don't necessarily want to go through years of formal teaching qualifications for whatever reason. There are people who are, you know, who for no fault of their own have faced forced early retirement because of the pandemic. There are people out there who are no longer working in the professions of their choice. Unemployment is creeping up across every part of the UK, and there may be people out there who genuinely would see if we sold it to them that education is a viable, credible, rewarding place to be, who may be perfect candidates to come into the classroom. I think there would be an expectation. Parents would have an expectation that there's some floor of a minimum, check.
But I suppose it's what that would be, isn't it? I mean,
in terms of course, and I think the General Teaching Council needs to be a big part of that conversation. So there is a form of standardisation, but not to make it prohibitive. We want. I think we want this to be as open as possible to get as many bums on seats. To be frank, because I think that makes a difference, and you can do that quickly. And I think you will see the positive upside of that if you do it quickly.
Michael, do you agree, or do you kind of hear what Jackie's saying about teaching assistants? And do you have any reservations, as Jamie said, about the kind of the qualification level they would have? I mean, are we talking about a dispute here, maybe about, would you expect degree level for a TA?
I'm keen for people to be as well qualified as they possibly can be to do jobs and to support. But the reality is, I think we would be arguing in lots of places about the qualifications required for jobs that don't exist. We in Scotland in the early years of devolution, post 99, the introduction of classroom assistants was one of the biggest priorities in education policy. And frankly, those people have disappeared en masse across Scotland. There is a fraction of the number there was at the turn of the century. And that is a result of the same process of budget cuts. So, and the message to me in this is that when we have this, and we will be having debates in the coming weeks and months about the number of teachers, we have to make sure that we include the number of support staff and the teaching assistants within that quota as well. We were clear in our manifesto in that election that we had to have a significant uplift in those numbers too. So that to me is the first order debate. There's a whole other discussion about how qualified, how we can make sure that those people are as effective as they can be, and if the opportunity to develop themselves to become more effective in their jobs, absolutely. But let's get them in the classroom. Let's get people in the classroom to do the job of helping Jackie and other people in the first place, because otherwise we'd be kind of, I do not belittle that conversation. It's absolutely, it's vital, it's important, particularly to the people who are in there. First order, let's get the people.
There are also certain subjects which are really struggling. If you look at STEM, for example, we've had shortages in that for since I first got elected. and I talked at the beginning about focus on the economies of the future and equipping young people with the skills that they need for where our economy in Scotland is heading. The Scottish economy is heading in very specific directions, I believe. If we're looking at things like renewable energy, looking at the tech sector here in Edinburgh, we see the growth of software and online businesses. We see our pharmaceutical industries growing in the West. We have one of the largest satellite manufacturing industries and aviation sectors, and there's a big focus on the climate and renewable energy. So we won't get people into these jobs if they're coming out of school without basic STEM knowledge, and that requires STEM teachers. Also, Scotland has a rurality problem. We have many island communities, we have many rural communities. There needs to be an overarching policy that will encourage people to go and teach in those communities where they really are struggling as well. And that's just about more than teaching and how much they get paid and what the school looks like. It's about the cost of housing. It's about whether they can get their own children into a school place, whether they can register for a GP for their family. I mean, there are other things that affect how many teachers will come into the system. I do believe those people are out there. I do believe we can increase the teacher workforce, but it's not just about getting them into the classroom. This is a career move for people, and it's a lifestyle, not just a job.
My mother has started listening. Hello, Mother. I hope you are well this morning. It's good to have you with us here in Edinburgh. And everybody listening, in fact, and Tim has made a comment here. Jamie, I think he's kind of challenging slightly what you've said here. He says, is a graduate going to work for a teacher assistant salary? There are degree qualifications in early years, but the pay in a nursery is usually minimum wage.
Yeah.
And I think he's hit on a good point there.
The pay in a nursery in Scotland, it depends which kind of nursery you go to. If you go to a publicly run nursery, you'll probably get paid more than a private one, which is why we have a shortage of nursery staff at the moment. No, he makes a valid point. I mean, if you spent years studying for a degree and there's a plethora of opportunities out there in the private sector, what is it that's going to make you make that move to the public sector? You're absolutely right. So, again, that's why I think we need to be open-minded as to the level of qualification needed to get people into the classroom.
We'll move on now a little bit, and we're going to go to the news in about, a few minutes' time, hopefully. But before we do that, curriculum. Obviously, it's very different in Scotland to England. In England, we're bombing on with a kind of knowledge-rich curriculum and separate subjects and everything else, whereas Scotland has something called the Curriculum for Excellence. And I suppose my question, and I'm going to ask this to everybody, but I'll start with Jackie as the teacher here. Is the Curriculum for Excellence fit for purpose? Come on, Jackie. There's a bar here, actually, where we are. It's not open yet, but we might need to fire it up soon.
Difficult. Can I say yes, but no?
Yes.
We make it work. But I don't think it's always been used in secondary schools in the way in which it was intended. And I think there's opportunity for reform.
What kind of reforms might you like to see? Is there anything curriculum-wise that you think would make a difference to you as a teacher?
Personally, I really support the knowledge-rich curriculum. I follow a lot of English geography teachers on Twitter, and I've learned an awful lot. And
Jamie's going to love you. He's nodding. He's going to love this. Michael, I don't know whether you will. Yeah, he's in the middle here.
Yeah, so the knowledge-rich curriculum, I fully support the work of people like Kate Jones. She's had a huge influence on me as a teacher. My passion is retrieval practice, and I've seen the benefits of that. So I would prefer it was more driven, the curriculum, in that direction. That's my own personal view.
Yeah, just a reminder here, Tom's texted in and said you can listen to Kate every morning, Friday, 7 a.m. on Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you, Tom. But yeah, absolutely. So, you've said, and that's very clear that, Scotland have gone a different way. The curriculum for excellence Michael, I'm going to come to you, and then I'll come to Jamie on this, because I feel like this could be an area where you might actually disagree, which would be nice. You know, we could have a bit of a, because we are kind of in a cafe / bar here, so it would be nice to have at least one punch up, wouldn't it? On a
Very stereotypical of you.
Oh no! This is nothing to do with Scotland. I have the same in Wales. Michael, curriculum for excellence, is it fit for purpose? Is it what you want?
I think the founding principles of curriculum for excellence still remain relevant and current. In fact, in some respects, they're ever more relevant in terms of the kind of challenges that Jamie was talking about, the different kind of economy we've got, the need to prepare young people to have a broader transferable skills to build them as learners. So I think the kind of the principles stand. I still support those. The great challenge has been implementation. The was an absolute mess. You know, it wasn't clear what we were meant to be doing. It was under-resourced in terms of development and the kind of preparation time that is required. It's not just in kind of not just teaching in silos, but across all. It's very challenging. And I think that probably talks to those broader problems in terms of resourcing around some implementation. And I don't think you can actually divorce the two. So I don't think our principal problem in this is about CFE or otherwise. Pedagogy, and that it can be accommodated, certainly more than accommodated, embraced, I believe, within CFE. But the reality is we need to make sure that people are supported to do that. I do think, though, we need to look at the broad outcomes that we're achieving. We committed in a recent manifesto ahead of our election to an overall review of curriculum excellence. We're at a stage now, I think, where we have to reflect on where we are and whether it's doing the things that we hoped it would do. There are mentioned around STEM subject, about making sure that we've got teaching staff to do that kind of work. Frankly, we have to compete with wages in the private sector where people get paid. You've got a maths degree, you can kind of name your price at Google. And that is a huge challenge. How we actually build a curriculum that is broad-based, collaborative, and can empower teachers to do the work that we hope they can do. I know that sounds I get that. I don't think it's a hard and
speak for yourself there, Michael. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tom. I'm sure your mum did as well. But yeah, I think that the principles are sound, but we need to make sure that it's doing what it's meant to do.
Jamie?
Yeah, I mean,
curriculum for excellence.
Look, it's have you got another hour on this? The reason I say that is because if it was working, then the government itself, Scottish government anyway, would not have commissioned a full-scale independent review into the curriculum by the OECD, which we talked about a lot last year. A report which was due in January of this year and delayed. In my the election, whether or not that would have affected the outcome of the election, because I think some of the issues in it that it will flag are issues that we already know, and the reason we know that is because teachers themselves talk about the curriculum, they tell us what's right and what's wrong with it. I think it would be unfair to say that everyone hates it. There are many teachers out there that love it. There are schools out there who really embraced it and get it. However, there are many that haven't. And I think it's that disparity which has caused most concern amongst parents. It's the guidance that went along with it. It's the lack of clarity on its implementation. It's also asking the unachievable in many cases as well. In order to meet the criteria of it, there simply aren't enough teaching hours in the day. And I think also what we probably want to think about is, what is it you're trying to get out of this? What is the point of the curriculum? Is that a means to an end? What is that end? And if the end is simply to increase attainment on a qualifications level, i.e. to get more people leaving with A's, reducing the attainment gap, getting them on so-called positive destinations, such as college, university, or a well-paid job, then that's fine. In effect, it needs to be used more as a tool of equipping young people with the skills, the broad skills that they need to move on in life. So if it worked perfectly, I would be the first to say, great, good on you, because it's meeting its objectives. if it's not meeting its objectives, and clearly there are issues with it. And we know that because I think we should listen more to what teachers are telling us, because they're the ones who are teaching it day in, day out. They're the ones that are sitting there with thousands of pages of guidance around it, and they themselves will know what is right and what is wrong with it. And that needs to be. And I heard feedback from many teachers who say that they tried to input into this so-called independent review into the curriculum, and they were simply not accepting evidence from the teaching community, and weren't interested in what teachers had to say. Well, that itself is a fail, you know, because surely it's those at the cold front of this that know best as to what's working and what's not. So I'm hoping that the review, when it's published, I think is it next month, Michael?
21st of June. So it's later this month.
I'm hoping it's comprehensive. It doesn't pull back any punches, and more importantly, that the government will respond and react to it, because it takes a lot of guts actually to pull your head out of the sand and say, "Yep, we admit things are not heading in the right direction." And if they will do that, they will have our support.
Question before we go to the news, my final questions for Michael and Jamie. Because of the kind of disastrous kind of debacle of the kind of elections in terms of the Labour in Scotland and Conservatives to an extent in Scotland, would you two ever consider a coalition to kind of kick out the SNP?
What kind of question is that? Education. That's just trying to get us in trouble.
That's not in my brief.
No, it's on Jimmy's big work. I cannot foresee that ever happening. I think that for as much as when Jamie and I talk about some of the areas of education that we might agree in terms of the critique of the Scottish government and how they do it, we come from fundamentally different places.
Yeah.
Really. The things, the broader politics of this, some of the things we talk about in the economy, I talk about my home city of Dundee. Our economy doesn't work, and we have huge poverty, and that relates to that poverty achievement gap. A lot of that's to do with conservative governments that over the years have deindustrialised and brutally parts of our country. We come from different places on this. I think James is a good guy, but I think there's probably too much distance between he and I on some of the fundamental views.
It's actually 2 meters distance, but but probably politically more. Yeah.
Look, I mean, I'll maybe take a slightly different tack. Just to spice it up a bit for your listeners. We actually, ahead of the election, we made an offer to other parties, the United Kingdom and Scotland's place in it, i.e. the pro-UK parties, or for want of a better but worse word, the unionist parties, saying we were open to do deals ahead of the election because we were looking at the polls and it was pointing towards an SNP majority. And I think there was a sensible conversation to be had ahead of the election. Unfortunately, no one took us up on that offer. And what we did see, clearly, was the SNP winning in seats where the pro-UK vote was split. And that would not have happened. What I would say, though, however, and it's the only political point I would make, is that we went into that election promising that we would stop the SNP getting a majority. We were forecast to be doomed at this election, losing 10 seats. We actually retained our place as the second largest party and the primary opposition in Parliament. And that's not, I mean, that's an analytical.
So now you're on politics, we're going to get animated.
No.
The reality, I think what we've got in Scotland is we've got an election that's divided down the middle, 50-50 essentially on the constitution.
Yeah. And
as long as we're caught in that frame where we have two divided sides that are shouting at each other and with total opposition. Essentially, I've seen that. I've just been a politician essentially for a few weeks. I've seen that for the Tories. It's true. I mean, elected just a few weeks ago. I've watched the Tories and the SNP shouting at each other for the last 2 weeks about this issue. And actually, the stuff we've talked about for the first hour of this programme doesn't get a look at. The reality is that they thrive off each other. They feed off each other in this debate. And, people who want to talk about these issues suffer on the outside as a result. We can't sustain that as a country. We need to actually have a place where we can come together and talk about the issues that matter to the country.
Let's finish
the more
on
we're divided on this, it's going to be, frankly, it's the end of progress in this country if we look for division in every single thing.
Let me agree with Michael. One last thing, and that's, I would be happy never to have to talk about the Constitution in the Scottish Parliament. I know we're going to go in there today and talk about nothing but it. I would happily put it to bed for that generation that we said we would, because I believe that the issues that we have talked about today are the meat and bones of society: education, health, justice, which I've moved on to, funding local authorities, dealing with poverty. These are important issues. Getting our economy back up to speed, and that so-called recovery from the pandemic that we're all trying to achieve. We won't achieve that recovery if we spend the next 5 years as a parliament talking about the constitution. I will stop talking about it when Nicola Sturgeon stops talking about it. I've said it before, and I'll
Good
say
luck
it
with
again.
that. I mean, the thing is, Jimmy, Nicola Sturgeon is obsessed with this, has been for her entire life. The reality is that we have to come to some kind of consensus as parts of the country that we are going to move on.
You can't move on.
You can't wait for Nicola Sturgeon to shut up and change her mind. It's not going to happen.
She's in government. That's the problem.
That is a problem.
Yeah, I won't mention coalitions again.
Thank you.
Okay, I promise. All right, and the bar will be open soon, probably. So
We've got work to do.
yeah, but no, I mean, yes, I get your point, but I mean, Jamie said before, and I want a bit of fact checking here from you, Michael. He said, "quote We reached out to other parties to try and secure majorities in certain seats or whatever." So the Conservatives apparently here were being quite cuddly. Were you?
We were being pragmatic.
Pragmatic.
We had what the polls were telling us.
My friend's got a band called Cuddly Shark, and I think that's the reality of there. Is that, of course, that's just another exercise in creating that polarized division. So we can all be on one team opposed to this, opposed to this one thing. So let's create a 50-50 situation, and let's just go around spinning in that cycle forever. Because actually it protects jobs on the Tory benches, it protects jobs on the SNP benches. I'm not worried about those jobs and my job in that regard. I'm worried about jobs in the streets and the services that we have. And we're not going to be able to have that debate as long as we stick in that kind of polarised position. Now, people may say that to me, well, it's naive. This is the debate that we've got to have. I just think that a different politics is possible. Actually, and frankly, a different politics is necessary.
We can make that happen, though. This is a new parliament. There are new people in there. We had huge turnover. Every party had new turnover. There are lots of new faces. It's a much more diverse parliament than it's ever been. And I think it's unfortunate that a reflection on a new member. I've been in there 5 years. It's unfortunate that the perception is that we are already entrenched in those dividing lines. And that saddens me in a way, because I don't want the next 5 years to turn into that entrenched, because I know what it was like in closing days of the last parliament. We can't go back to that. We really can't. There are more important things to get on with, and that's we have to get on with our day job, really. And I think the public will expect that of us, if nothing else.
The final part of our conversation, which we're going to kick off in about 2 minutes after the news is, and I'll tell you the question that I'm going to fire to all of you to kind of finish off, is how can education improve in Scotland, and what one thing would make schools better for young people? So I'm going to ask each of you in turn. We're going to go to the news now and also a tiny little advertising break. Thanks everybody for tuning into Teachers Talk Radio, and we will be back in about 30 seconds, or no, 2 minutes even.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. New research from the London School of Economics has shown that children born in the summer are being mislabelled as having special educational needs by their primary schools. Using census records for over 6 million children who were in state primary schools over the years 2008 to 2018, Dr. Tammy Campbell found that among children reaching Year 6 in 2018, 16% of autumn-born girls had been attributed SEND support at some point during primary school, compared to 26% of girls. Similarly, 28% of autumn-born boys were given support, compared to 40% of those born in the summer. Dr. Campbell stated that the study shows how rigid prescriptive expectations not suitable for relatively younger children result in many of these children being denoted with SEND. and then the system that has created these needs cannot or will not meet them. This is because inherently, by the same conditions through which it creates some SEND, it is configured not to serve the children it attributes. It is configured instead to denote children as sufficient, good, meeting standards, expected level, or deficient, not good, not meeting standards, not at the expected level. This, the evidence begins to suggest, may contribute to increasing numbers of children being forced from the mainstream system. Teachers and schools are spending increasing portions of time serving the needs of the centralized assessment and accountability system, delineating children according to its dictates, rather than working with individuals to ensure learning, progress, and inclusion. Teaching unions have criticised the government's plan to extend the school day, saying it could do more harm than good. The plan has been drawn up by Sir Kevin Collins, the government's Education Recovery Commissioner, and proposes a minimum 35-hour week and 100 hours of additional schooling. However, opposition from the Treasury could see the plan receive 10 times less funding than originally proposed, meaning the implementation of the proposal could fall short. Education spokespeople have been critical of the plan so far, with concerns over the impact on staff well-being and students feeling they are being punished for circumstances beyond their control. Criticism also centred on Ofsted's role in overseeing the rollout of the extended school day. That was your daily education news briefing.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davy-dyscalculia.co.uk.
And welcome back. We are live again in Edinburgh, the city centre. It's a beautiful place here. We're right in the middle of the kind of Newtown district. Newtown district.
Which is actually old.
Well, I was going to say it is quite old, and it's 19th century. But the what does interest me and frustrate me is that beautiful park over there, gents, which is privatised and you can't get in it. And it's
Don't talk to me about privatisation. This is not the Conservatives' fault. This one. It's privately owned.
Because that is locked. You can't get in it. It's a massive.
Before I think it was always private. No, it's one of those.
I think you can't blame Jamie for this. Henry Dundas or something.
200 years ago, maybe.
A while ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, we are live again, and Jackie, we're going to start just for this last kind of 10-15 minutes of the show this morning, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to ask you about Scottish qualifications and particularly exam reform. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts of exams in Scotland?
Well, I think that this year has shown us that we need exams. I know there's an argument for continuous assessment, and I know a lot of people don't agree with formal exams, but I really feel that this year has shown us that we do need exams. I taught in England at the start of my career, so I came from a system with multiple curriculum authorities, qualification authorities, sorry. And so it is interesting the fact that the SQA has control of everything. I mean, is there potential? In some ways it makes life easier because everybody in every school is doing the same qualification, but then you don't have the competition. You don't have any variety. Personally, maybe, I don't know, is there the opportunity for more exam boards in Scotland as there are in England? I'd be interested to hear Jamie and Michael's opinion on that.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, so Jackie raises the thing about, well, I think it's going to become an ever thornier subject about the SQA and how sustainable that body is. I mean, people listening across the UK won't necessarily be fully kind of briefed on the utterly disastrous series of decisions that the SQA have taken during the pandemic. When I talked about leadership earlier in the programme, the SQA and the failure of that organisation has been right at the heart of that. They have very, very poorly served everybody involved. Again, none of it was easy, but actually, time and again, they've made misstep decisions. Yesterday, we had an appeals process published after 8 months, 6 promises, 2 deadlines, and frankly, I still don't think it serves the purpose other than the fact that it exists. You know, so they have not dealt with the current situation well in any shape or form, but they were actually in a bad position prior to the pandemic. I think the last 2 years has opened up that broader question in terms of exam reform, assessment, and whether we should, and go to your kind of the first question in this, can we look at a different way of doing things? I think that's a debate that I'm open to. But frankly, if there is some kind of discussion around it, it has to bring everybody with it. I've been speaking to university vice chancellors on this, and the principals of universities, and asking them about, as one of the, I suppose, the main consumers of our high-end qualifications, to say, would they set the same value by non-examination based questions? And they're saying actually they're looking at dropping many closed book examinations and undergraduate courses because they don't feel the pandemic's proven to them actually that they're not producing value. So there is a discussion to be had there. I think it has to come to, frankly, the base principles of actually what works and what it produces. If I can, it was a lengthy answer.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Last year, what we had was the situation in Scotland where we had essentially the results will be produced by a mutant algorithm, which showed that marked people on a curve. And what it actually showed in trying to replicate previous results, that actually the children from the poorest backgrounds were incredibly poorly served. They were underperforming against their teacher expectations. Now, to me, that actually proves that things that probably lefties like me have long suspected, actually that exams in different ways and at different times can be a means of actually kind of gaming the system against people from the most private backgrounds. That private schools and kind of top-end state schools in more affluent areas actually coach kids to understand and be able to do exams. I found myself in that situation as a child myself. I was poor at exams, and then it was only in my second university degree that I clicked how to do them. And I kind of felt, well, maybe there was a set of tricks here I could have been taught when I was at school. I would have done slightly better in my qualifications. But more broadly, I think it's a discussion that we can have, but the institutions at the heart of it, the SQA, frankly, I think are for the chop. I can't understand that their current performance can be viewed to be anything other than disastrous.
Jamie, Michael said here about exams potentially leading to kind of the gaming of the system, if you like, or they are open to gaming. I mean, do you agree with that?
I agree with the concept that exams serve some people better than others. I think that's fair. Not everyone's geared up to an exam scenario, and we've seen. I mean, the question of whether to exam or not to exam is not the same question as to SQA or not to SQA. We know not to SQA because we've seen the disastrous, and history has repeated itself. We should add this year. Some of the errors they made last year have simply compounded in the second year of lockdown. But that's a different question. How you restructure and you reform the examination system is not. That's not me gurgling, by the way.
Just shaking the ice. Just shaking the ice.
He's getting a cocktail.
Yeah.
One of this conversation heats up. Reforming the SQA as a qualifications body, as was mentioned, is a whole other ballgame. Showing that leadership and offering that clarity to teachers and schools. I think there is a different question as to whether exams are the only way of producing qualifications. And I think what is clear is that what we've seen this year is you cannot sit an exam if you have not done coursework that you need to sit that exam.
Don't worry, you can talk
It's
over
not a
that.
cappuccino. It was a mojito, but it's changing. It is fundamentally obvious to everyone that you cannot. And when they tried to pretend that exams weren't happening, but were happening anyway in Scotland, the young people were, at their wits' end because of that. Because you can't sit down with a paper that you haven't done the coursework for. There is a place for ongoing assessment, I think, to inform teacher judgment, and I think there is a place for teacher judgment as opposed to algorithms that we saw that penalise those from underdeprived communities.
That your colleague Gavin Williamson introduced the algorithms.
Well, the algorithm, I don't know what the algorithm in England they used was, but I'm not entirely convinced it was the same one we had here. And the reason I know that is because in Scotland,
Wasn't track it though.
well, what I do know is that it was students in our most deprived communities who were hit hardest by the algorithm in Scotland. Whether that was true south of the border or not, I have no idea. But we do know that algorithms, as broad brush approaches, don't work for individuals, and it's the individual which matters in this conversation. So again, I am open to the conversation. I hear what people say. Young people themselves tell me two different things. Some say, I like exams. I want that end of year exam. Some parents believe it is that great leveler which doesn't exist with ongoing assessments, where there is room for potential manipulation of the system. Up to politicians to say what's right and what's wrong. My problem with it at the moment is there are politicians who are so entrenched on either side of that debate. That's not a healthy debate.
But would it be fair to say that it is all of your responsibilities with regards to the SQA? I mean, can we only blame SNP for the SQA debacles?
The SNP education minister was 100% in charge and directing the government agency, directing the SQA as to what outcomes he wanted out of that last year. He accepted that. Yeah. They accepted that. They came to our education committee and said, we were only doing what we were asked to do.
There'll be votes in Parliament on this today. It's a very live issue in terms of the performance of the SQA. So this afternoon we'll be debating that and voting on it as well. It's I think where we end up with is, I think we'll most likely end up with a kind of a mixed economy in terms of exam annual assessment that exists at the moment. I think there's a fair chance to say that it will look different than it looks at the moment. There's stronger voices, I think, on both sides of that argument, but we have to find the right balance, and that's the challenge. And I think Jackie's points in terms of the teachers and pupils and families who want to see exams, I think that's right. A big departure, huge departure, I think culturally would be probably a shift that would be incredibly difficult to realise. So
it should
most
be
likely a mix.
It should be tied into the curricular reform on a wider scale, because if you pull the rug from under the exam feet, then it does alter what teachers teach and how they teach it, I believe. So I think it has to be part of that wider look at what is being asked of teachers, what are they being asked to deliver, and how are they preparing students for what outcomes. Because if it is ongoing assessment, then that will alter. I believe that will have a different approach required to the end of year exams or the prelim approach. So you can't do one without doing the other. The two are massively interlinked.
Final question. This is kind of a quick, I suppose, question. It doesn't have to be quick fire, but it's the final one. Jackie, what one thing would make education better for young people in Scotland if you had one thing that you could do or change?
For me, it would be time for teachers to devote to their professional development.
Michael?
I think workload, because I think that pulls in a multitude of sins. It touches on what Jackie's just said, but it actually means in order to deal with workload, we need more bodies in classrooms. We need to actually have a breadth of voices in there. We need the right support in place. That would make probably, I think, the most immediate difference in how we recover from where we've been over the last 2 years.
Thanks, Michael. And Jamie?
I agree with both of those, and I think they are linked. But I'm going to give you a slightly different answer, and that's, I believe, that we are staring down the barrel of a mental health crisis in young people, not just in Scotland. Probably people listening to this right across the UK and beyond will understand and appreciate that. I'm not saying that's anyone's fault, by the way. This is a byproduct of 15 months of horrendous lockdowns and a complete upheaval in young people's lives. But we do know that mental health outcomes are not in a great place in Scotland, and we do know that there's huge disparity between the mental health of young people in those schools and communities which are more deprived than their neighbouring schools and communities. And that will inevitably affect their educational attainment and their ability to go into the classroom and soak up what has been offered to them by the teachers. I think we as politicians and society in general needs to have a laser focus on the mental health of young people, and that will require counsellors in schools, will require throwing money at this, supporting the third sector. We offer a lot of support to young people, and not forgetting that you don't just go to school to learn and meet your friends. For many young people, it's also escape from the family environment, and it's escape from very difficult circumstances that they live in. And we should never underestimate the importance of the school environment for those reasons alone.
I'd like to, just before we kind of close the show, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Michael, to Jamie, to Jackie, and also to Seema Devchand, who is also here helping with the tech in the background. I'd like to thank Graham for producing the show. In 2 weeks' time, I'm back. Well, I'm back next week, but actually in 2 weeks' time, I've got Andreas Schleicher, who is the head of education for OECD and also the top man at PISA. So I'm going to be interviewing Andreas about all things education in about 2 weeks' time live. That'll be an interesting one. So do tune in for that. We've got lots more Teachers Talk radio shows coming up, both today and tomorrow. Tune in from 4 p.m. today. Listen live to all of our shows. And if you have anything to say or to add or any feedback on anything we're doing, then just tweet us at TTRadio2021 or email us at teacherstalkradio@gmail.com. Thank you very much. And I'll be back next week. And thanks to all my guests. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.